Hi there and welcome. This is Gina from McGuire and thank you so much for stopping by. Today I thought I'd share with you how to create your own pop-up slider card without any specialty dies needed. You just need a few basic tools and I'll walk you through it. Now this is something that you can use with scenes like the one I have here or different stamps and dies added to it. All you do is you pull on the tab on the top and the middle pops up. I think it's best to first take a look at the completed card to understand the direction we're headed in. So here's our card. It's just a typical card, but there's a tab on the top that you can pull and the center pops up to reveal a message underneath. You could have a scene in there, another stamped image in there. I kept it simple with another greeting. I've done this type of card in the past, but I recently thought of an easier way to do it using products you probably have. So I thought I'd share it today. Now for this, I'm using a new kit from Gina Designs and Thermoweb. It's called Gnome for the holidays. This is a brilliant and unique kit. I'm so excited about it. What's inside creates that little scene that you see down there on the bottom with the gnomes, the trees, and the mountains. But what's special about this is it includes stamped stencils and dies that all work together to create the scene. Then there's also some foil to add shine. So there's a lot to this. It's really well thought out. Some of mine might be prototypes, so yours will look a little bit better, but I wanted to show you what's inside. Now the meat of this kit are the dies. These dies are used to assemble the cute little gnomes that you saw in the front of the box and that I'll be using today. There are also dies to create trees and also dies to create the mountaintops, the snowy mountaintops for the mountains that you can stamp. So I feel like you start with the dies and then you can add stamping or stenciling. So here's the stamp set. It has the images that you can stamp on to the die cut pieces to create a little more interest on them and some patterns. There are also many different sentiments included in this and the mountain image that you see there on the bottom. Now this is my favorite part. There is a stencil included, and this allows you to use a stencil to decorate your die cuts instead of stamps. So you have both options, or you could do both. The stencil also includes these little snowbanks along the edges. Isn't that brilliant? A great way to use that space on the stencil. So you can use that for inking some snowbanks or masking off an area. So I will mostly be using the stencil to decorate my die cuts, but I'll also use this stamp set for our sentiments. I like that these three key elements in the box, the stencil, the die, and the stamps, can all be used together in different ways. I hope they do more kits like this because this is a kind of kit that you can use over and over again and use it creatively too. The kit also comes with 2 packs of Deco foil, and they happen to be my 2 favorites. These are the Gina Glimmering Gold and Sparkling Silver foils. Now, if you have watched any of my videos, you know that I use Deco foils quite often for many different techniques, usually with a laminator to transfer that foil. However, today I won't be using a laminator. So if you don't have one, this technique will work for you. But foils are a great way to add some shine to your cards. And there are many sheets in a pack here, so these foils will last you for a very long time. Okay, let's get into making this card. I'm sorry I spent so much time getting excited about that kit, but I get really excited when companies come up with really unique, brilliant ideas. It makes me excited as a card maker, so I just wanted to share that with you. Okay, so let's start by cutting the beard of our little gnome here. I thought it'd be fun to cut that instead of from white cardstock. I cut it from Thermoweb white flock Deco foil. So it's hard to see, but this is fuzzy. So I'll put it up to the camera to see if you can see the fuzz on it. Now you can use this as a transfer. You transfer it onto a product and it sticks, or you can just die cut it. And that's all I did here. I just die cut the beards from that flock material. Now here I have a tray. I'll link to the tray that I use, but it helps me keep all my dies and die cuts organized as I create. I also cut some beards from white cardstock just to use for dimension behind the flock cardstock on our final card. And then I also needed to create a nose, but I didn't have any cardstock that I thought looked good for a nose. So I just colored my white cardstock with a Copic marker, and then I will die cut from that. So instead of searching for the perfect color cardstock, I just colored it. And I thought that was an easy way to come up with a color that would work for that. Okay, so I continued to create all of my die cuts with red cardstock and green cardstock. Now it's time to add the foil shine to the hat of my gnome and to the trees. I cut extra pieces, so I had leftovers saved for later on. To add the foil to my die cuts, I decided to use the stencil. But first, I want to have something to hold each of my die cuts. So I just have this piece of scrap cardstock. The backside, I had tried a technique and it didn't work, so I'm cutting it up to use here. I just temporarily glued my die cut onto that scrap piece of cardstock, and now I'm lining up the stencil with it. Now this might freak some of you out, but I'm cutting my stencil up into individual pieces. You don't have to. You can mask off the area you want, but you'll see that it's easier to cut up the stencil. So now I will tape the piece of stencil that I want to add to each die cut right onto it. So you can see I'm lining up with the die cut and taping it onto that scrap paper, which really makes it helpful. Here I have a tree, and I'm lining up this portion of the stencil with my tree die cut. And I'll line up each of the pieces with different die cuts. Again, I'm making many more pieces than I need for my card, but I'm saving them for later. I also wanted to be able to show you some other options that you can do. My favorite way to apply foil over a stencil is to use a product called Transfer Gel Duo. This is intended to be used with the Deco foil that we'll be using today. The reason it is called Duo is there are two ways that you can use it. One is with a hot laminating machine that applies heat and pressure, or you can use it with a die cut machine just to apply pressure, and that will transfer the gel. And that's what I'm going to do today because not everyone has a laminator. So I'm taking the transfer gel and just applying a thin coating of it over the stencil into the open areas. So you'll see I pick up each piece and apply it and set it aside. Now before it dries, I will remove the stencil and I'll clean it off. But I am going to use the stencil on more than one piece before we clean it, and you'll see that in a moment. Notice that this product goes on very white. It's almost like a thin icing, very easy to apply. It goes on white. You'll know it's dry when it becomes clear. And it takes about an hour, but I'll move on to the other parts of my card while we wait for it to dry. So here I'm peeling that one off so that I can add it to another tree. So you'll see I'll line it up to this tree and apply it to this. So I'll apply the transfer gel onto all of my die cut pieces and let them dry all at once. And to wash the stencil afterwards, I just use a little soapy water in the sink. So if you want to do foil transfer, the Deco foil transfer with a stencil, you need to get the transfer gel. The Duo one is the one that lets you do it without heat. Okay, now while that dries, let's do the pop-up feature, and I'm really excited about this because it's very easy to do. Now, as I mentioned, I have done this technique in other videos in other ways, and I will link to those videos at the end of this one, but today I thought I'd show you how to do the pop-up feature with a rectangle die, which many people have. You could also cut it by hand if you wanted to. Now, any rectangle die would work. I decided to use the Gina K Master Layouts 2 die set. I like these layering dies because they cut close together, so you get a really nice fine mat. But it happens that this single rectangle die works great for the pop-up feature. Now this is going to be a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch card in the end. And this rectangle cuts about 2 1/4 by 4 1/4. Anything close to that would be great. It could be smaller and bigger if you want. You'll get an idea of what size would work for you as we go along. Okay, so you can see here what this rectangle looks like on a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch note card. You want a little bit of room along the sides and the bottom because we'll need to put foam tape in there. So this is just a white cardstock panel that is again 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches, and I'm tracing the inside of the rectangle die onto it. This is just so I know where to stamp my sentiment. I want my first sentiment to be right on the bottom of that rectangle. I'm using my Hero Arts MISTI stamping tool. You can use an acrylic block if you prefer. I just find this to be handy. Now for a sentiment, there is in that stamp set, Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. But I thought it would be kind of playful to switch it, to do Happy Christmas and Merry Holidays. So I cut my stamps apart. I just cut in between the words and it's no problem at all. I'm stamping Christmas first, and that is right above the bottom pencil line from the rectangle we traced. Then right on top of that, I'll stamp happy. I like to stamp the two words separately so that I can get them really close together, nest them close together. If you want to, you could stick with the traditional Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays, but I thought since this was a playful card, mixing it up and doing Happy Christmas would be fun. Now from this panel, I'm only using the bottom portion to make it look kind of like a snowbank on the bottom. I could freehand cut a snowbank, but instead I use that piece that's included in the stencil in the kit to just trace a line. And then I will just cut right along that line, and we're again only using this bottom piece. So the front of my card will actually be a piece of blue cardstock, 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, and I'll just glue this white snowbank along the bottom. Now you could do anything on this panel. You could stamp on it, you could stencil on it, anything. I'm keeping it pretty simple by only adding the snowbank. Now it's time to create the front of our pop-up feature. So I am taping temporarily our rectangle die right along where I traced the pencil, so right in the center. Now you can use any die cut machine for this. I'm using my Spellbinders Platinum 6, and I will do partial die cutting with this rectangle. So I have my bottom plate in there. I'm putting my cardstock and die on top. Then I'll put the top plate on, but it won't cover the entire die. It'll go right up to the edge of my die there at the top. So you see the top of the die over there on the right. The edge of my top cutting plate lines up with it. There's a beveled edge on this cutting plate. So when I run this through lined up like this, that top part of the die over there on the right will not cut, but everything under the plate will. If your cutting plate doesn't have a beveled edge, just make sure that the edge of your cutting plate is a little bit below that top cutting edge. Very easy to do. I'm kind of pausing it here just to explain to you. Okay, so now I'll run it through, and what happens is that entire rectangle cuts except that top cutting line. You could practice this on scrap paper to make sure you have your plate situated just right, but it's easy to do. Okay, next we need to do a score line there where the top cutting line would have been. So we'll score right along the top. I'm going to use a score buddy for this along with a bone folder. I just want to get a nice fold line there. Okay, the next part I'm going to slow down so you can see it. So you'll see it's in slow motion here. What we need to do is fold the flap in half. Now you could do a score first if you wanted to, but I found it easier not to. So I'm folding this in half so that the edge where it says Christmas lines up with the score line we just did. Now you'll see my paper gets all creasy there and looks terrible. That's okay, I'm covering it anyways. To prevent that, you could have scored first with your scoreboard, but I didn't think it was necessary. So I reinforced that fold line there with my bone folder, and there we have our front flap. Super easy to do and nothing really special needed other than a rectangle die. Next, we get to create the tab that allows the pop-up to happen. So that's that white piece sticking out on the top. For this, I'm starting with a piece of cardstock that is 5.5 inches tall. The width of it needs to be about a 1/2 inch bigger on each side than the little pop-up feature we just created. So I'm lining it up here, putting a pencil mark. So it's a little bit bigger on both sides. So remember the rectangle I used was about 2 1/4 inches wide. So this piece will end up being 3 1/4 inches wide. And again, it's 5.5 inches tall, just like our panel. So let me show you again. You can see that it's a bit wider than the flap on the front, and it's the same height as our card. The reason I'm showing you this is depending on what size your rectangle is, you'll be able to figure it out. Okay, the next thing we need to do is create a score line on this pull tab piece, and it is a 1/2 inch from one edge. So I'll just do a little score line there at 5 inches. Then we will reinforce that fold line. This will allow you to attach it to the pop-up feature on the front of the card. Now this next step is very easy. We're going to cut the corners off from that flap. I'm lining up the flap on the front of our card centered on that and tracing along the edges, so that I'll cut these little square corners off of our flap. It's not hard to do, and this makes the feature work. So I'll cut along the pencil line, and then also cut along the score line there. And I'll do the same thing to the other side. In doing this, we're making that little flap to be the same width as the flap on the front of our card, or the pop-up feature on the front of our card. So you see those are the same width now. Now it's time to assemble. We're in the home stretch. So on that folded flap there, I'll put some strong adhesive. Any strong adhesive, dry or wet, would work here. I'm just using some double-sided tape. I will then remove that release paper, and I will stick that to the back of our flap. There are a few ways to do this. There's an easier way to do it than what I did, but you'll see it works fine. So I'm putting the adhesive of the flap right onto the back of the pop-up feature on the front of our card. So now I need to get that pull tab through the hole. I'll just tuck it in there. I could have glued it from behind, but I didn't think of it at the time. So that just slides in there, and now we have our pop-up feature done, and you'll see how that pops up wonderfully. All we need to do is add it onto a card. By the way, if you don't have a rectangle die, you could always draw the flap on the front with a pencil and then cut along it with a craft knife. Okay, so here is my top folding white note card, 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I will trace the opening there onto the front of the note card. I want to stamp a sentiment on the inside, so when you pull the tab, you'll see something underneath. I decided to keep it simple by stamping Merry Holidays, and then also a few snowflakes from this Gina design stamp set. It's the Holiday Wreath Builder. I took 3 snowflakes from there, and I just stamped them with sea glass ink from Gina Designs. I will also use this set on the front of our card a little bit later on. Now think about it. This is what's going to show when you pull the pop-up feature. You could stamp anything you want to here. You could put a little gnome, another little gnome that will peek through. I decided to keep it simple with just the sentiment and a few snowflakes. Okay, now it's time to go back and finish off our die cuts, and we can add our foil. Remember when I applied the transfer gel, it went on white, and I know it's dry when it becomes clear. That's when we're ready to add the foil. So here I have a die cut, and you can see that my transfer gel is now clear. I take my piece of foil that I cut down, I lay it onto it pretty side up, and then I run it through my die cut machine as if I were running paper and a die. Just your normal traditional way of using the machine. This just simply applies pressure, which makes the foil stick to that transfer gel. So I can peel off the foil, and there you have the beautiful transfer results. Another option that you can use is to run it through a heated laminator. Doesn't matter, whatever works for you. I normally use a laminator, but I wanted to show you that you can use a die cut machine with pressure instead if you wanted to. I like to go back and forth a few times through my die cut machine. I'm not sure if it makes a bit of difference, but it's something I do just to make sure I get a good transfer. So here, this time I'm using the sparkling silver foil. Keep in mind there are many wonderful foils out there that Thermoweb has, so you could do any colors that you wanted. You could even color these silver foils like this, color it with a Copic marker, so it would be like a shiny red or a pink instead. Now remember earlier I used white flocking, and I used it just to die cut. I wanted to show you, you can use it with the transfer gel too. So this is just an extra. Here I've got some transfer gel on this hat. It's hard to see there. I'm taking a piece of the white flocking material and laying it soft side down onto the die cut, running it back and forth through the machine. And what happens is the fuzz comes off of the white piece and stays behind on our die cut. Look at that. So now we have a fuzzy pattern on our hat. I didn't use this on today's card, but I wanted to show you that that's how that flocking works. You can either die cut it as is or transfer it like that. Okay, now we can assemble our little gnome. I did add additional die cuts behind our soft beard and the top of our hat and our nose. And I glued all the pieces onto a scrap piece of red cardstock. It just gave me a place to assemble my gnome so that I could have him in one piece and then add that to the card. I have black for the little boots, and I have the little body there. And then we will add our furry little beard and then the top of the hat. I did die cut additional boots from red cardstock and glued them to make it look like his arms were tucked behind him. That's totally up to you if you want to do that. Another thing you could do to this gnome, since he's an eyeless gnome, you could add little black dots for eyes or googly eyes. It looks super cute with googly eyes. But I decided to leave the eyes off and make it look like his hat is sitting low. I just think it's a fun and playful looking gnome. For the top of the hat, I could have used like a white pom-pom. I think that'd be fun. But instead, I just die cut the small circle from the white flocking material. So we have this cute little gnome set up. You could do any little die cut or stamp shapes for the front of your pop-up card. But isn't he the cutest? I just love him. Now for the trees, I wanted to have different size trees. So you can see this is the size the die is. I just cut the bottom off some of my trees so that I could have 3 different sizes. Easy way to get more out of your dies. So I ended up creating 4 trees of different sizes and the one little gnome for the center. I have lots of leftover pieces for future cards. I'm taping the flap down so it lays flat while I assemble the pieces. I like to kind of plan out where things are going to go by laying them down. I decided I wanted something in the sky, so I used the same 3 snowflakes that I used inside, and I used those to stamp in the sky with sea glass ink from Gina Designs. After I've stamped my snowflakes, we can assemble the card. Now this is very important. Anything on that flap, the pop-up feature on the front, you need to make sure you put the glue in the right place. You only want glue below the score line. So these trees will only be glued at the bottom. If you put glue above the score line, you'll keep the pop-up feature from happening. So make sure the glue is only under the score line and on the bottom of these die cuts here. You could die cut a big rectangle die and glue that to that. In fact, the rectangle die that we used to create the pop-up feature, you could die cut one of those, stamp anything you want on it, and glue it to the bottom underneath the flap, and then that rectangle will pop up. Again, I'll link to a video later on with more pop-up ideas, so you can think of different ways to decorate this. My other 2 trees are only getting glued around the pop-up feature, so those won't pop up. Now we can remove that tape that was just helping hold it flat, and let's test it out. When I pull it up, yep, those middle pieces pop up. I just think that's such a fun interactive card. Before we glue the card together, I decided to stamp pull on that top tab. I used the Lawn Fawn Push Here stamp set. You could just simply write pull there if you wanted to, or leave it blank. I then like to round the corners of the tab just for a nice finished look, but you could totally skip that too. Okay, now we need to add this to our card. I find it best to put foam tape around it. I chose to use the Gina Designs white foam tape because I finally got more. I kept forgetting to order more. The nice thing about this foam tape is it's a little more narrow than other foam tapes, so I don't have to cut the tape narrow. This is a great width. And it's not super thick, so it's perfect for interactive cards like this. So I'm putting a piece along the sides and along the bottom, making sure there's a little wiggle room around our pull tab. Now, this is something you don't have to do. I kind of went overboard. I like to use my anti-static powder tool against the inside edge of any foam tape when I'm making an interactive card. I don't want my pull tab to touch the foam tape and get stuck there. So by using an anti-static powder tool, it removes the stick from the side of the foam tape, if there is any. Now I'm removing the release paper, and this will get put onto the front of my white note card that we stamped on earlier. To make sure I line it up nicely, I like to use the inside corner of my MISTI. I put the card in the corner, then the front panel in the corner, and press it down. Easy way to line it up. You can also do that in the corner of a scoreboard. So here is a look at the final card. I did add some star sequins to the top of our trees. And when you pull that tab on the top, the middle section pops up. You can also see a closer look at that beautiful Deco foil. Keep in mind, if you didn't want to do foiling, there was this stamp set that would allow you to stamp or heat emboss the decorations on the tree and the pattern on the hat. So you could definitely just do stamping if you prefer. So think of all the different ways you could create a pop-up card using a simple rectangle die or just cutting those 3 lines, the side and the bottom of the flap, with a craft knife. I hope you found this video helpful and that you'll give this technique a try. If you're interested in the products that I talk about, they're linked below in my YouTube description. But also here in the middle, I have links to other videos showing other ways to do this pop-up feature. As always, thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great day.